Well, hello, everybody. I'm Brie Castellini, Seed&Spark's Film Community Manager, and welcome to yet another Creative Sustainability session. So we've got a little bit of housekeeping at the top before we bring on our incredible speaker today. And before we do anything else, we'd first like to acknowledge that the land that we are all on is occupied territory. So please check the YouTube live comments feed or the video description for an amazing app that will tell you exactly whose land you are currently watching from, as well as a link to a First Nations COVID Relief Fund. If you are not familiar with Seed&Spark, as a result of being on this cool event that we're doing today, we are a platform built to support creators by providing tools for wherever you are in your journey, from crowdfunding and education to creative distribution approaches. So that's a little bit about us, and feel free to get in touch if you have any other questions. So as for today, we have a couple of featured partners in our Narrative as Resistance event that we're really excited to be partnering with: Women of Color Unite and Sisterhood Media. Women of Color Unite is a social action organization focusing on fair access, fair treatment, and fair pay for women of color in all aspects of the entertainment and media industries. They just launched their new website, which is very cool, with all sorts of relevant information, including statistics and their initiatives and how to join the organization. So definitely check them out at wocunite.org. And Sisterhood Media strives to address the need for film distribution by delivering content on their own streaming service, Sisterhood Media TV. Their platform supports filmmakers devoted to telling stories about queerness, accessibility, race, gender, culture, class, and more, while working towards a better tomorrow. Learn more about their work on sisterhoodmedia.net. And as always, we got to give a shout out to our sponsors, Shutterstock and WeTransfer. If you're here and have RSVP'd on the Eventbrite for this event, you will be receiving a follow-up with some goodies from both of those sponsors. So on with the show. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to Fanshen Cox, who is a creative development executive at Pearl Street Films. She is also the playwright, producer, performer of the one-woman show, One Drop of Love, exploring the construction of race in the U.S. and how it affects our closest relationships. She is the co-author of The Inclusion Writer, the co-host of the Sista Brunch podcast, and is dedicated to contributing to change in the entertainment industry so that everyone feels seen and heard. And now we are seeing and hearing you. Fanshen, welcome.
Thank you so much. Especially thank you to Seed&Spark, not just for having me, which I'm so honored to be here, but also for all the incredible, important work you do around crowdfunding and distributing films. It's such an amazing and important resource. I also just have to shout out my sister Cheryl Bedford and all the work they're doing at the JTC list and Women of Color Unite. They are nonstop, and I'm so fortunate to have them as a model constantly when I get pushback on things like The Inclusion Writer. So thank you, sister, for all the work you're doing. And to Kalpana and Stacy, who I created The Inclusion Writer with, we are constantly working to update it and answer all the challenges we get with it. So I want to always start by acknowledging the amazing folks in my life who help me do what I do. And also, because this session today is about storytelling, I figured that I have to start with a story. And so I wanted to tell you about the story of my first name. It's unusual, and a lot of people kind of, I get called Francine and Farshen and Fashion. But I think it's important to kind of think about our names and how we got them and what they mean to the world. And so I'm actually not the best person to tell you this story. So I've brought some people with me, and I'm so sorry because I didn't ask permission if they could come, but I've got 3 people with me that are much better equipped to tell this story. So you're going to be meeting my Jamaican grandmother and my Pan-Africanist father from Jamaica, and also my white mother. So yeah, come on. Granddaughter, me only granddaughter, me have a favor to ask of you. The next time now you call your mommy and your daddy, ask them for me. What in God's name is a Fanshen? Yeah, but me never could say that name. It's why me just call you my granddaughter. Why them give you that name? Oh, well, hi, everybody. Oh, my goodness. Hi. Oh, well, thank you. Oh, geez, I know this is for my daughter, but I am so glad to be here. Okay, I'm Mama Trudy. Okay. And actually, before I tell you about her name, I do have one thing to say because, well, I heard her tell you all that I am white, and I have something to say about that. Okay, so actually, now I am Blackfeet Indian and Cherokee and Danish. No, I know that some of you would just take one look at me and immediately say that I am white, but I sure as hell don't feel white. I don't. Oh, and Fanshen, honey, well, now she should not forget that we made her on purpose. We did. Okay, now about her name. Okay, so now her father and I, well, we met at the University of Oregon. Now, he was getting his PhD and I was his TA for American politics. And it was the late 60s and we were reading lots of revolutionary stuff, doing analysis on Marxism and Mao, you know. Oh, and we used to go to these meetings. And one time we won a trip. We won a trip to Alabama to visit a family of Black Panthers. We did. No, we did. It was a drawing out of a hat in one of my most leftist groups, the one where we did embroidery for the Viet Cong that were there. Yes. Okay. So now, anyway, your father and I were reading the book Fanshen together, and we were really, really close. The closest we ever were. Okay, now you see. Back in those times, I was very interested in the socialist revolution, especially in the form of a village program. I wanted to find a place to raise you kids to be competent and self-respecting and socially conscious citizens. A place where racial and class oppression was absent, you see. So then I do some research on how different countries go about doing that. And then I saw that book. Fanshen, in the bookstore back in Eugene. And I was so taken up with it that I decided to name you after it. Okay, well, you've got to hear the beginning of this book because this says everything about why we gave her this name. Okay, every revolution creates new words. The Chinese Revolution created a whole new vocabulary. A most important word in this vocabulary was Fanshen. Now, literally, it means to turn the body or to turn over, see, but to China's hundreds of millions of landless and land poor peasants, it meant to stand up, to throw off the landlord yoke, to abolish word blindness and learn to read, to establish equality between the sexes. But it meant much more than this. It meant to enter a new world. So that is how I got this name that leaves a lot of people trying to figure out constantly what I am and who I am based on this name. And I like to tell stories about my name and also ask people to tell their own stories about their names because our names have a lot of weight about who we are. Some of us have had to change our names legally because it didn't fit how we identify or how we see ourselves, or the other people were consistently seeing us in one way based on our names. Our names also tell us a lot about our historical context. What was going on in the world when you were named? And does that name that you were given fit with what was happening, or does it kind of come up against it? Of course, I was named towards the end of the civil rights era, and kind of the kind of calming down of revolutionary acts in this country. And I know why I got this name. And those were the seeds planted for me. Those kinds of stories were planted for me early on. And that's how I kind of knew that I'd be a storyteller, but I also knew that I wanted my stories to actually mean something. And so I set about telling stories and listening to other people's stories. I became an educator. I taught in the Cape Verdean Islands in West Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer. I taught English as a second language in the South Bronx in New York. I taught in community colleges throughout Los Angeles, listening to people's stories because that was the best way I knew to be able to teach and see teaching as an exchange. I then created my one-woman show, One Drop of Love. So you'll hear some excerpts. Those were excerpts from the show, and took it across the country for about 7 years, bringing it into classrooms and organizations and theaters. And the show examines the construction of race in the United States and tells some hard truths and asks people to think more critically about race and racism and how it affects our closest relationships. And then about 3.5 years ago, I began working at Pearl Street Films with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. We all grew up together, and we grew up in this very progressive city in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and believed in making sure that everybody's story was told, making sure that everybody was represented in our theater productions where we became close. But of course, coming into Hollywood, I started to see all kinds of barriers to the reality of that, to really making sure that we are telling broader stories, that we're sharing broader stories. So I was in the fortunate position to be able to do things like create the Inclusion Writer with Kalpana and Stacy, and now do development to make sure that I'm able to help hire people who are telling these stories. And one thing that I've noticed consistently, from teaching to doing the show to working in the entertainment industry, is that we need some values. We need a set of values. We need a mantra to remind us consistently of how we are actually using our storytelling for good, for change. And so I've come up with this mantra, this kind of daily reasoning in my mind about, before I choose a story that I'm going to help nurture into the world, or as I'm writing my own stories, or as I'm listening to someone else tell a story, this is what I'm consistently thinking is truth, justice, and love. And I can't see any of y'all, so I'm gonna ask you to just say that out loud. I'm gonna count to 3, and we're all gonna say it out loud, because I'd love for this to be part of your mantra when you think about your stories or other stories you're listening to. So let's say it together. 1, 2, 3. Truth, justice, and love. So I want to take today to talk about kind of what each of these mean and what they can mean in your storytelling and the ways that you approach your work. So often when I say that truth is this really important first step, people ask me, well, whose truth? And of course we hear this a lot from our current administration about, claims of fake news. And my clear answer is the non-dominant narrative. And so we should always be thinking, as we are telling our own story, or we are thinking about how we share the stories of others, what's the non-dominant piece of this story? What are the stories within this broader context that haven't been told? So we can look at slave narratives as an example. I hear a lot of people saying, like, I don't want to hear another slave story. Well, there are all these nuances to enslavement, especially around heroes that were enslaved peoples, that we haven't told yet and that deserve to be told. And so what we need to do is focus on the non-dominant ones, and that opens up and broadens our opportunity to tell stories, and tell stories that are actually going to have an impact and make a change. So I've got some examples also of where to really think about, as you are telling truths, what things should you really hone in on? And forgive me, because I think some of you know this terminology already, but I'm gonna go with a little baseline just in case we all need to get on the same page. So one of the truths that I think is a non-dominant narrative is intersectionality. And we are so fortunate to have Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined this phrase. And she says, because of their intersectional identity as both women and people of color, the interests and experiences of women of color are frequently marginalized within both. And her story of coming into creating this terminology is an important one to share. And you should watch her TED Talk if you haven't. But she was in a legal case around discrimination of a Black woman. And in this case, the corporation said, well, we're not racist because look at all of these Black people that we've hired. But all of the Black people they hired were Black men. And they said, well, we're not sexist because look at all of these women we have working for us. But all of those women were white women. And so Kimberly Crenshaw said, we need to understand intersectionality to understand where are those places in the margins that we are not talking about. It's completely connected to this truth of the non-dominant story, because we cannot pigeonhole ourselves into one identity and think that we are addressing everything. A term that drives me crazy is when we say we're going to have more women and people of color, and within people of color there are women. So when we say women and people of color, just tell the truth and say you're talking about white women and people of color, and then acknowledge that you're diminishing within that people of color category. You are diminishing the experiences of brown women, of indigenous women, of Black women. So I always push in that type of terminology to tell the full truth. Think about all the things that we are leaving out. Now, I think a lot of my friends are on here today. So hi, you all. It's great to see you. Thank you for supporting. So again, you all are already going to know the answer to this question. But a lot of times when I talk about intersectionality, especially kind of in different places around the country, I get the question, but I just identify as human. And, I don't see color, and, I'm a human. And I love this next slide is a story in a meme, which I love. It is the full, complete answer to this kind of thinking, this kind of statement. Is this. So you can choose to identify however you want, and some of you can even get away with that. But take a good look at yourself and your experiences and ask yourself whether that is a truth for others. Because the non-dominant narrative is that there are lots of people who don't get to choose to identify and how they identify. I talk a lot with people who identify as multiracial, mixed race, biracial. And this is also an important part of that conversation. We often lament, oh, they're asking me, what are you? And it's not a lament, it's actually something to push back on, because we are being privileged by being asked, versus in this picture, somebody who doesn't have that opportunity to answer that question. It is just immediately assumed what you are, and you don't have the choice to answer. So again, these truth-telling, intersectionality, and non-dominant narratives, I am begging on a daily basis Hollywood to start doing that with their stories. And all of you, we are hoping that this is what you're going to start doing with your stories, telling the truth, telling the non-dominant narratives, and being intersectional consistently in your thoughts and how you're approaching things. So another non-dominant narrative is this one. Now, trust me, I'm not talking about just white, because that's a plenty dominant narrative. We got white cisgendered men all up and down our history in school, in Hollywood. We've got that. We're good and we're solid on that story. But if you're going to tell the story of a white person, why doesn't anyone ever start that story by talking about the origins of whiteness? This is a non-dominant narrative. So all of us who are going around identifying as white or half white, what if we actually stop and think about, what does that mean? What's the crux of that? So this is another example of a non-dominant narrative that look, if there are any producers out there, I'm looking to tell this next story. So feel free to hit me up, because you can imagine I'm getting some pushback on it. So here's the story. Here's a story about the invention of whiteness, an example of a non-dominant narrative that we have got to tell. The cases of Ozawa and Thind in the 1920s. So in the 1920s, in the United States, the only way that you could become a naturalized citizen was if you could prove that you were white. Now, of course, there were concessions for people of African descent because we had been brought here against our will. But you had to prove in the 1920s, as recently as the 1920s, the only way that you could immigrate to this country and become a naturalized citizen was if you proved that you were white. And so this man named Takao Ozawa, a Japanese man, had been in this country for about 20 years. He came here to go to school. And then he did everything possible to become white, what he understood whiteness meant. So he did not allow his children, his wife, to speak Japanese at home. They could only speak English. They attended white churches, predominantly white churches. They attended, their neighborhoods were all white. He even said, this is in the court documents, he even said, we never go out in the sun because we want to maintain our whiteness. And that was accepted as part of this proof that this man was white and he therefore should have his citizenship. And the Supreme Court looks over all the documents and they come back and they say, but thank you for all of your hard work and all the things you've done here. However, you are not considered white because the scientists say that you have to be born in this particular region that would make you Caucasian. They weren't using the word white at the time, although they were starting to, but would make you Caucasian, and you had to have been born or your heritage is from this particular region that would make you white. And so no, you cannot become a US citizen. 3 months later, only 3 months, there's a man named Bhagat Singh Thind who was born in India, and he's watching Ozawa's case very, very carefully because his case is coming up as well. Born in India, came and lived in this country, served in the army, in the armed forces, was wealthy. And so in India, that meant that he had all the power he needed. And he was sure. And the best part about his case is that he was born within the region that scientists were saying he had to be born in order to be considered white. So he's like, this is easy, a no-brainer. I'm taking this to the Supreme Court. 3 months. 3 months later, the Supreme Court looks at his documents again, thanks him for his service to the country and everything he's done. However, their decision in his case is that he is not white because the science is no longer reliable in this case, and instead they will rely on the common man. So within 3 months, the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest legal power in our country, determined what our country would look like for the rest of our lives and the ways that this country would be limited. And the truth is that neither the Supreme Court or any other court cases since then have ever addressed defining what white is. They can only always address what white isn't. And so in reality, it's a lie. And yet it drives everything. So where is that truth? Why isn't Hollywood telling that truth? The next time you cast a film or you write a story and it is all white people, it is up to you to tell that truth. That origin of why these people are in the position they're in is a truth that we have to tell in order to make real change. So in your stories, always, always, always start with truth because we can't go anywhere until you do. So when I start talking about whiteness, this is what happens in a lot of rooms I'm in. There's a lot of shifting in seats. There's a lot of like wiping off of the palms because people get sweaty. I get uncomfortable. And if you've read White Fragility yet, you'll know why. And Dr. D'Angelo breaks it down very clearly about what happens to all of us, but in particular to white people when we start speaking truth about whiteness, and when white people feel racialized as something for the first time, when the rest of us are walking around living with this. And my Mama Trudy, my dear Mama Trudy, who, okay, hold on, Mom, hold on. She wants to come back. So my dear Mama Trudy feels very uncomfortable when I talk about the origins of whiteness. And okay, so she wants to tell you another story. So here she is. What's that? Oh, okay. Well, she wants me to tell you all about my dad, or okay, well, okay, yes, actually, I guess I should say my dad's. Well, okay. So now she knows, Fanshen knows all about my daddy. That is her grandpa Grant. Well, he was born in Elgin, a little forestry logging town in Oregon, and I just loved him. I did. But my mom left him. She left him and she took up with Leighton Hamilton. But that's okay. That's okay. She divorced him after he threatened to kill us with a rifle. And then she married him again. Okay. So now that's okay. That's my daddy. That's her grandpa Grant, and then it was Leighton Hamilton twice. So, and then it was Gentry, the pedophile. Oh, but then it was Swales and Adams. Oh, and Mitchell also twice. What's that? Fanshen wants to know, how did I survive? Well, I just hid all the time. I hid all the time. Now, you see, when I was just a baby, a little toddler, I would hide in chicken boxes in the barn. You know, I would just go around and I would find the smallest space that I could fit myself into, and I would just stay there. And I would hide. Well, I would just hide in chicken boxes all the time. Thank you, Mama Trudy. So I share Mama Trudy's story because I understand, and I even empathize with what some people, some white people in particular, go through when we push against you and say, you have to tell this full story, which is that a lot of times for a lot of you, what's going on in your mind is, but my life was hard. And it was, and no one's taking that away from you. You know, my mother had to deal with sexual violence. She had to deal with life-threatening situations, and she was extremely poor. But what she wasn't was Black and all of those things. She was not, at least identifiably, Indigenous and all of those things. And what we know beyond any doubt is that if you take all of those things that make life challenging and add this other identity, going back to intersectional identities, that makes life that much more difficult. And so, yes, this part of the presentation is absolutely a call to the white folks in the industry, both because you are in the positions of power and because you owe us this work. Don't hide in chicken boxes. Let the toddlers hide in chicken boxes. Let's protect the toddlers who are hiding in chicken boxes, but you have to do the work. You have to tell the truth about how you got to where you got. What are the origins of your story that brought you to where you are? That's part of the work. We've got work to do too. I think about colorism. I'm so lucky to be working with Akosua Sane and Zetta Elliott with Kalpana to refine the language on the inclusion rider to include colorism, and Cheryl Bedford, my girl, she works on everything with me, to include language around colorism. That's one of those things that have to be worked on via white folks, especially as you think about casting in films, but also internally, Black folks and brown folks, and the ways that we are perpetuating colorism. We are the adults. We cannot hide in chicken boxes. We must tell the truths. We must push ourselves to consider intersectionality consistently. So, when we tell the truth, which are sharing the non-dominant narratives, and push ourselves, push ourselves, push ourselves beyond our comfort levels, that's how we get to justice. And so this part of the presentation is all about you. It's all about every single person listening here who tells a story and asking yourself, I've told this truth and it was maybe difficult for me to tell. And now I have all of this understanding and knowledge and evidence before me of disparities. What am I going to do in my storytelling to make sure that I am addressing those truths and those disparities? You need to actively address those. What are you doing in the stories? So I'm actually going to give you a minute, because how we're doing on time. Okay, good. I'm going to give you just a minute to think about every story you're telling right now, the stories that you want to tell yourself, or the stories that are coming into you. Maybe you're an executive and you take pitches in, or maybe you're a producer and you're helping to tell stories. What are you doing to address those non-dominant narratives? Take a minute to think about it and time you. So again, I think just from my friends who said they'd be on today, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I love this one. I love thinking about justice because we can all always do better. And again, I'll keep bringing up the inclusion writer because it's something that we were so sure was, we had everything we needed in this one, and so we were good, we were good to go. And then we realized, as an example, that none of the three of us in any way could bring a perspective of people with disabilities into this conversation. And even though we built that into the inclusion writer, we hadn't directly connected with anyone who could really tell us how to make sure the language is addressing that. So we were lucky to work with Diana Elizabeth Jordan and Tatiana Lee on looking at that language and making sure that it is addressing it in a way that is appropriate. Take whatever it is that you thought about during that minute, and please tell somebody else, tell your entire workspace, tell folks that this is how you are going to make change in your stories and other stories. And please feel free to go on the comments on any of our posts here and tell us, share how you're doing it. But most importantly, unlike with truth, where I gave you lots of examples, this is your work to do. So I'm not going to give you examples. You can see those of us who are working towards this, the things that are being done. You can look at the Michael B. Jordans and the Effie Browns and all those folks who are very clearly putting in the work. But now it's up to you. How are you pursuing justice based on telling those truths? And now the part that everybody's waiting for, the love. And everybody's always like, hey, well, okay, all right, but what's the love part? And here's the beautiful thing. by telling the truth and then actively pursuing justice based on that truth, that's all you got to do to show love. So, I like hugs. I'm a hugger. All of you who know me know I'm the first one to go in for a hug. I do ask for consent now because I've learned, but I'm a hugger, but it feels good. But that's not me really showing love. It's not really me showing kindness. I show love by pushing for truth in my stories and by pushing for justice in my stories. And that's what you got to do too. So, of course, other people have said this way better than I have. Dr. Cornel West says, never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. That's Hollywood's opportunity here. That's everybody who's listening. That is your opportunity. That is your responsibility, is to tell the truth and pursue justice and love us. Love this industry we're in by telling the truth and pursuing justice. Love yourselves by telling the truth and pursuing justice. So, to wrap it up, and then we'll do our Q&A, just always remember that if you are a loving and kind person, you can show that all the time by telling the truth and actively in ways that we can really see, tangible ways, seeking justice based on those truths. Thank you all so much. All right, I'm gonna bring this, and I think I can now see you, and I think we're gonna start the Q&A.
Hello. I'm back for Q&A, everybody. Thank you so much, Fanshen. That was incredible.
Oh, thank you so much, Bree.
And I know you couldn't see your face during that whole presentation, but we could. It was excellent.
Did you see me sweating bullets?
I think we're all like, the way that we see each other on like calls like this now, our standards are much lower, but you looked perfect and glowing, and we were so honored to have you here. So as the little slider says, everyone, please send in questions. Mostly the comments have just been yes, oh my God, yes, or quotes of things that you said. So that's, I'm sure, validating, but not very helpful for a Q&A purpose. So I have a question just to kind of start us off as people are getting their questions in. And it's definitely a conversation that comes up a lot in indie film where, you're not paying very well and you only have your friends around you to tell a story. How would you recommend somebody from, let's call it a dominant demographic, insert whatever here. How do you recommend that, dominant creators approach making sure that they can tell non-dominant truths without also taking the space of someone for whom the story is theirs?
Great question. I think it's important, first of all, to consider not doing it. And I should say, because this is important. So don't take your ball and leave the playground. Do it, but put somebody else in the position to be able to tell the story and act as a consultant, right? So I think that's the very first one. However, I know Hollywood, and I've really gotten to know the challenges, kind of working with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck around their name still means something. And I always tell them, you lucky they still mean something today. Tomorrow might be different. But while they do, then how do we do that? Like, how do we both balance that power of people who are in the dominant demographic with also stepping back? So that's where I loved, forgive me because his name is escaping me right now, but the showrunner for The Watchmen really talked publicly about how important it was for him to take on a reverential and listening role in his writer's room, and that doesn't happen enough, right? So if you are in the position of the only way we can get money is for this person to headline this, then you better be ready to do a whole lot of listening and a whole lot of conceding, because you're talking about an experience you know nothing and will never know anything about on a personal level.
I think that's absolutely true. And it's something that a lot of people need to hear. So
Yeah.
we've got a couple of questions coming in
Awesome.
now. So we've got one, looks like the first question from, I think, Bon Mi. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name right. There's lots of dashes above letters, and I never know what to do with those. When you write stories, do you try to be as original as possible or flow with what the audience wants to see on screen?
Oh, such a great question. And this is another quick story, which is when I moved to Hollywood in '01, ready to be an actor. And I was like, that's all I'm going to do. And I immediately came up against, did your agent submit you for the white role or the black role? You know, in all these ways, all this limited thinking. And so I started to learn to write. I started to learn to produce, and that was really important. But I was reading all of the books about here's how you do it and sell your script. And so then I got in this mentality of, oh, okay, the audience wants to see this. This is what can sell. And it took me 13 years to write a true story, because as I went to write One Drop, which was, I should mention, my MFA thesis from Cal State Los Angeles, as I went to write One Drop, I remember in the best of ways, I completely let go of anything that could happen with this story. And I said, if my Mama Trudy, and y'all know, this is my girl now, you know a little bit about Mama Trudy. If Mama Trudy likes this story and I do it in our living room, that will be enough for me. And wouldn't you know, that's the story that then catapulted me as a writer and producer and performer. So I can't say it enough. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. The audiences will be there. And fortunately, we are now in a period where we've got Seed&Spark, and we've got people acknowledging and studios acknowledging that there are niches, right? And that there's an audience for you. And so you tell your truth and that audience will find you.
I definitely think that that's true. And speaking of the truth, question from Lauren. If you've created a narrative that speaks the truth, but the folks you pitch it to try to dim that truth or alter it, what are the best next steps?
Go to somebody else. And because we're out here, and again, I mean, I can't gas you all up enough at Seed&Spark, but I mean, if you've looked at the projects that are supported by Seed&Spark, another one is Film Independent. Look at the projects they're doing. These are places that are going to embrace you. Another, I'll try to be as confidential as I can while giving a little bit of gossip, but early on, I was represented by a pretty big agency for One Drop. And as they started booking things for me, I'll just say they were not the right fit. So I was being brought to audiences that weren't entirely ready for the information. And it's not that I needed to be, completely with the choir, but it needed to be, it does, because it directly deals with things that are super uncomfortable for a lot of people. You need to have that balance. You need to, and so ultimately we parted ways. And and I remember thinking, like, this is it. My career I finally made it with this agent. And I realized in the end, actually, it wasn't helpful. So move on. There are people looking for you in your stories.
Yes, I think that's true. Question from Tanya. I was wondering about telling the truth to children and this new idea to me to keep it intersectional. Any advice on talking to kids?
Oh my gosh. Okay. She did not ask this question for me to gas her up, but I'm about to gas this woman up. This is my friend Tanya, who has an organization. She's located in Boston, but her organization is called Little Uprisings. And it is about teaching children about how justice, telling the truth and pursuing justice. I mean, truly, if I could say there's an organization that exists that makes this appropriate for young people, this is one of them. And Tanya, in the best of ways, also makes it very clear in her workshops how ready the kids are. I mean, the children, we know, and this is race specific, but I'm sure as we do more studies, it's clear, and I'm sorry, I don't have stats on disability as an example, or LGBTQ, but babies know, right? They're starting to recognize these things from the earliest ages. So it's generally the adults who are afraid of us telling the truth. So I know this is part of why her work can be challenging, because that's this whole other entity that she has to deal with. Whereas the kids, that you may obviously need to think about the language. So in the same way, for example, the Supreme Court was using Caucasian and couldn't keep using it because it was, and they changed it to white because they were expanding. But in our case, you can think about, how do we still tell the truth to kids, but in ways that they can grasp at different age levels. So hi, Tanya.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of friends in this comment section.
Oh,
it's very fun to watch.
my loves.
Another question from Von Me. What was one of the greatest challenges you have found when pursuing stories of a non-dominant narrative?
White fragility. In all of its forms, and the biggest challenge being violence, white terror, and I should also include patriarchy in that. The most kind of violent responses have been from white cisgendered presenting men. And that's really scary. And so I'm glad you asked that, because I think it's important to note that we're not always safe telling the truth, spiritually and physically. And if you're not safe, you don't have to do that work in that moment. And that's part of why a lot of that piece on telling the truth is geared towards white people, when in terms of race. Same for able-bodied people, if we're talking about representation for disability, but that those who are who are not in positions of being in danger spiritually and physically are really the ones that have to do that piece of the work. And then when we do feel safe, that's when we tell it. But the challenge is that white terror, as we've seen recently, and we continue to see, is an extremely powerful measure that white supremacists are more than willing to take to shut us down.
It's just a real bummer we have to say that, but thank you for being honest, as with everything. This is maybe a slightly lighter question, and I'm excited to hear your answer, from Kelly. Dearest Fanshen, how are you finding joy in prioritizing your own well-being this week?
That's my girl, social worker, so she's always checking in and making sure that she's good. She's good. Now, see, you got me stuck. I'm going away this weekend. So I'm going to get away, and that's wonderful. I have amazing people in my life, like Kelly. So, I might be calling you this weekend, girl, but surrounded by Sister Brunch is another example. This podcast, which is work, but it is pure joy. Our second season, we just interviewed Hanalei Culpepper, who was the first woman, and certainly the first Black woman, to have to direct the pilot episode of a Star Trek series, Picard. I'm now officially a Trekkie. So if your work is being around these amazing folks that look like you, and have some of the challenges, but also share the joys, that helps. But she is going to tell me I can't include work in it, so I'm going away this weekend.
Perfect. Well, that's exciting.
Thank you.
Question from Monique. How can you defend your work when you receive reader notes from screenwriting competitions who may not get the truth you're trying to share, which could also be from some production companies?
Oof, Monique, that's that's a tough one. And I wish there were a quick answer or an easy answer, because the Monique Morton, I'm gonna shout her out. She is a screenwriter. She's in, I think you're in New Orleans, Louisiana. We went to school together. The problem is the folks in these decision-making positions are limited in the same ways those casting directors were. Are you coming out for white or Black? The people in these script competitions and, in the production companies don't relate to our experiences. So again, unfortunately, this is one of those cases where find the places that relate to your experience. And that sucks because there aren't a lot of them, but they are in existence. And again, so be on the JTC list so that we can find you, those of us who are looking for you. Look at all the stories on Seed&Spark, make your story. And I don't mean to say that's easy, but it is easier than it has been before because you have a studio in your pocket, in your phone. And don't take all of their notes to heart. However, I do think it is worthwhile that if you are sending your work out to a large variety of script competitions or production companies and you're getting tepid responses, I do think it's on you to go back to the work and think about what's not working. I think that there is something there that is not connecting. Again, especially if you are submitting to places that represent varied stories. That's where we got to be a little truthful with ourselves around something's not quite connecting here, and go back and look at that.
Yeah, one of the pieces of advice we give in our Art of the Pitch workshop, there's an upcoming one. Yeah, there's an upcoming one, everyone. So go check out our Eventbrite or seedandspark.com/events. But a piece of advice we often give is it's usually not the advice given during a feedback round that is useful for a script, for a pitch, whatever, but the fact that somebody felt the need to offer a suggestion, that's usually where your problem is. So maybe their solution is wrong, and maybe they might be wrong at their core. But if a particular part of your script or pitch or whatever seems to be getting pushback, it might be worth looking at it and saying, okay, well, if I were to do this in a different way, based on the confusion or the reactions that I'm getting, what would I do with that? Because it's ultimately up to you to decide how it is right to, improve your own story. But people's continued mention of a particular section might be a sign that something isn't being communicated as clearly as it could be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that of course goes for content that you do take the time to kind of, even if you consider it practice, kind of, film yourself, make a short video and throw it up online. We're still probably in a space where we can think of it as somewhat democratic. That right. Yes, I know the algorithms make it really challenging, but here's the thing is that even, your friends will tell you the truth based on how many times they view your work. And they might be telling you they love it, but you can get a sense of how things are working. Look, I got some trash out there, y'all. Look, I'm 50, so I'm really lucky that like I didn't put too much shit out there before people start Googling you. But and having said that, I got to be real honest with myself about looking back at it and being like, that was trash. And, and more importantly, like, okay, that was trash. Now, how do I make it better? How do I tried to tell the One Drop story 7 years prior. And every time I got to, a quick story is that it is about my upcoming wedding, and my father doesn't attend the wedding. And I'm pretty sure it's because I'm marrying a European. And so every time 7 years prior, trying to tell this story, I would get up in a storytelling group or something and get to that part and just break down in tears. Well, that was great for me and cathartic and like, a therapy session. But I was like, I can't really just get up on stage and cry this whole time. So also allow yourself. I think one mistake a lot of writers make is, or storytellers make, is that you kind of just throw it out, and don't do that. Do yourself the favor of marinate on it. People are like, how long you been telling one, or how long did it take you to tell One Drop? I'm like, 43 motherfucking years. Like, this shit was not it, because I had to marinate. I had to, get it together and share hard truths. So Monique, hold on to your stuff, sister. Keep going.
All right, question from Audaz Entertainment. How can you provide media literacy to your audience if some of your audience is culturally not savvy with choosing appropriate film TV to watch?
Oh my goodness, media literacy. Well, all right, let me shout you out. So you have the Black Muslim Fly Girl Festival. This is Nia, and yeah, media literacy is such a perfect example. It always comes up in the notes that I give in pitches, and I always ask myself, like, do I just send them a bunch of links on media literacy first and ask them to read all of this so that then they understand why I'm giving this note, or does the note just come? So this is another one of those, it's going to take time questions, but my goodness, we have got to, that's a truth that we are not telling, is really understanding the ways that media manipulates us into, you know, kind of siloed thinking. And so provide media, insist on colleges and universities doing media literacy, like USC, you know, AFI, they should all have required media literacy classes as they're learning how to tell stories.
Yeah, media literacy is one of those things that I think nobody expected to be as important as it is. And then the internet kind of just exploded and we were like, oh, we should have been doing this 20 years ago. Whoops.
And then we got this administration in and it's like, ooh.
Yeah, if that's not a case for media literacy needed in schools, I do not know what is.
Yes.
All right, so we're down to our last couple of minutes, but we got some really great questions I want to get to from Tish. Is there a green book for safe spaces in Hollywood for our stories?
Oh, love it. Hey, I will be in touch, sister. What a great idea. What a great idea. And we're not, but I don't know if we can call it green book. We might need to, we just want to.
It's a loaded phrase, unfortunately.
But yeah, the Black, Indigenous, Asian, like one of those books. I think that's what a wonderful idea. I'll be in touch.
Well, I guess that's a to be continued kind of an answer.
Yes.
Question from Tatiana. How can a young Black woman who gets placed in a leadership position in theater be effective for standing up for other underrepresented groups, especially when her white peers don't listen or agree?
Ooh. Wow. Yeah. Yep. Especially in theater, Tatiana. Hi, Tatiana. Yeah. The American theater, I will say, American theater is doing better. It's still feeling like some lip service, which, you know, it can be argued. I was talking with April Rain, who created Oscars So White, the other day about talking to her about the new Academy standards and how they don't really mean a whole lot because anything that's already won in the past could still win. And yet I think that kind of public accountability piece is important if it is followed by all of us truth tellers getting together and holding those folks accountable. So Tatiana, you've got to have a group of people around you to go back to these white peers and tell them, so that you're not the only voice. You're not the only Effie Brown in the room. You know, that you have to, as an example, you have to be surrounded by folks who are going to make it clear that you're not just the angry Black woman or just the woman of color who's standing up for other folks. This work is not to be done alone. So, you know, and I know I owe you an email. This is like the sister brunch from Fanshen's girlfriends. I'm like, I should have had a drink with y'all. We could have had a little happy hour. I love you all. Thank you.
All right. Well, we got one more question, I think, that is a perfect one to go out on. And that question is from Sav Rogers. Fanshen, what can we do to support the work you're putting out into the world?
Oh, well.
Shameless self-promo time.
But see, I'm a promo you, Sav. Sav is working on this fabulous documentary called Chasing Amy, and how that film, Chasing Amy, and I love it because Ben is supportive as well, is about how, seeing this representation of an LGBTQ person meant so much to Sav. So I'm gonna shout you out. Follow Chasing Amy. For me, please listen to, rate, subscribe Sister Brunch. And, we say that it is by us and about us, but it is for everyone. I mean, I think that's back to that truth question is, as people tell their truths, folks got to listen, right? And so that Sister Brunch is a perfect example of, you tell me you can't find people to hire. We got women who share their entire story and all their experience on this podcast. And it grew out of a real group called Sister Brunch of women working in the industry. So please rate, subscribe, follow Sister Brunch. You will maybe be surprised about this one. Feel free to hold me and Pearl Street and Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Drew Vinton, and Madison Ainley, the whole team at Pearl Street, accountable for the inclusion rider. So if you see projects that should be reflecting what we have agreed to do publicly, and they are not reflecting that, y'all can send me an email. You can shout me out. You can call me out online. It is helpful. I invite that because it's truth telling. So that is how. Thank you for that question.
All right. Well, we are at our hour. So thank you so much to everyone for watching today. Fanshen, thank you so much for giving us your time and telling us the truth and being open to receiving the truth right back. I think that's a really, really important aspect of all of this. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bree. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Seed&Spark. Thanks all of you.
And to everyone at home, once again, thanks so much for tuning in. And as a reminder, if you are able, we would love your support to continue bringing you these awesome events always for free. They will always be free, and we can keep doing that with your support. So check out the link in the video description and in the comments to contribute what you can if you found today's workshop valuable. I know I did. So coming up next, if you're curious about what other programming we've got coming your way, we have a crowdfunding to build independence workshop Monday at 11 a.m. EST. So if you're interested in telling your own truth instead and telling the gatekeepers, you know what, wait your turn. I'm going to do this myself. Definitely stop by that crowdfunding workshop. It'll be brought to you by No Studios, Free the Work, Black Film Space, and Comfy Film NOLA. And then on Wednesday, next Wednesday, we will be getting real with documentary filmmakers during our latest noon Pacific time lunch and learn session. So if you're a doc maker or have friends who are documentary filmmakers, definitely stop by that. So once again, thanks so much for coming, everyone, and have a great, truthful, and justice-filled, and joy-filled, and restful weekend.
Yes. Bye-bye. Thank you.